I'm really pleased to introduce Jennifer Rasal. Did I get it right? Awesome. Senior data scientist with the Marine Stewardship Council. Work includes drawing together old and new data with machine learning to map out and identify patterns in fisheries success of achieving MSC certification. If you don't know what MSC is, I'm assuming you will find out very shortly. So I'll leave that as a cliffhanger. She also provides important support to internal and external researchers seeking to use and understand MSC data sets. Actually, that is why she is here this week. Jennifer has been working with us at Project Seahorse to look into MSC's engagement to date with bottom trawl fisheries around the world. Jennifer's work actually further contributes to two really important global processes, which I was really interested to learn about. MSC certification is actually used by countries and organizations as part of their commitment to the world's sustainable development goals, particularly SDG 14, which we should all know is on life below water. And she's actually MSC's representative for the work being conducted by the Biodiversity Indicator Partnership that allows governments and other track and monitor progress towards that SDG. So it's really important work. And also works as a consultant ecosystem assessment tool. Prior to joining MSC, Jennifer focusing on the impact of local fisheries as well as the impacts on EU protected species. Has an undergraduate degree from the University of Liverpool and a master's degree from Plymouth University. So I'm really excited to welcome Jenny. We need all the help we can to move fisheries towards sustainability. And as many of us know, while governments play a central role in that work, they can be a little bit. And I think we really need to see a lot of leadership from industry. And in fact, industry has proven over and over that they sometimes set the bar for environmental improvement. So MSC's work is really central to getting us where we need to go. And I'm very excited to learn more about it. So welcome, Jenny.
I have some issues. Some issues online, so we're just going to try and fix this. And then
Yes. I like that frustrated. Sorry.
always.
They can't see you.
Smartest minds in the world, but we can't figure out how to PowerPoints.
Yeah. So, yeah,
Oh,
so
I
it
see
should be
the
fine.
problem. No, that's not the problem.
It's okay now. I'm
Is it?
gonna. Yeah. Keep it. Be fine.
All good?
As long as the sound's okay. You're good to go.
Excellent. Okay, no worries. Thank you for sorting that. And yes, thank you as well, Sarah, for a lovely introduction. And thank you to you all for actually welcoming me to your university. It's been a lovely week here so far. Everyone has been really, really friendly. So thank you. So yes, I'm here from the Marine Stewardship Council's research team to talk a little bit about a recent paper that we published. But before we get into that, what I would just like to do is give a brief introduction, as Sarah said, about the MSC and the organisation and how we actually function. Now, let me get this right. Hopefully, yes, there we go. So this is our vision and our mission statement for the MSC, but the very basics and core of this is that We want all fish stocks to be healthy. We want all fishermen to have a steady, secure employment, and we want the world food supply to be protected. And the way in which we've done this is to go about writing the Sustainable Fishing Standard. Now, the MSC's standard is now considered widely renowned as being the best in the world, and also one of the most complex and most difficult for fisheries to actually achieve, because the bar is set so high for them. Now, how our standard is put together. So it's a nice diagram to help explain, but it's broadly split into 3 core principles. So the first principle 1 is where we actually assess the target stock, so the actual species that the fishery is targeting and trying to fish. And then we have principle 2. This goes much wider, and this is where we start to assess the rest of the ecosystem. So this is where we look into habitat, we look into bycatch, and we look into also the endangered, threatened, and the protected species. And all this is brought together under the principle 2. And then principle 3, we go even broader, where we actually start to look at the fishery management level as well. Now, underneath these 3 core principles, we actually have a further 25 performance indicators. Now, these indicators, a fishery must be assessed against every single one. They have to pass every single performance indicator as well. If they have one that fails, it means they fail the entire assessment and they cannot be certified. On top of that, passing isn't enough. Even if they pass all the performance indicators, they still actually have to score high enough to get an overall principal score of 80. Anything less than 80 and automatic fail, and fish cannot use our eco label. Now, I'm just there to label which is the sustainable fisheries. That's not good enough for the MSC. We want more. We want to actually be seeing change on the water. We want to drive the fisheries towards becoming sustainable. And we do this through our theory of change. Okay. So when you buy a product, or anyone buys a product with our Bluefish label, you become part of, I guess, what we call our virtuous loop here. So every point on this cycle is a point which is helping to protect our fish stocks and our healthy oceans. So just to explain what on earth's going on here, if we start with the top left circle, fisheries that are meeting the MSC standard. They've been independently certified as sustainable. Now, independently certified is a key thing here, because the MSC are not the ones who conduct the assessments. The assessment is conducted by third parties. These are our conformity assessment bodies, who have consultants who are specially trained in how to apply the standard, because it is a vast standard and it gets very complicated. The next across, we have our retailers and our restaurants. So these are the organizations that are actually wanting to choose to serve and sell sustainable seafood. And these can be a whole host of companies. They can be your small independent restaurants, your fish and chip shops if you're in the UK, or it can even be the much greater organizations like McDonald's, for instance. And all of these are retailers, people who are wanting to make good choices with their business practices. And then we move on to the final circle on the top row, and this is our certified supply chain. Now, I'm probably not actually going to do it justice, because this is actually presenting our chain of custody standard, which is a whole other standard alongside the fishery standard. And unfortunately, I think it's often a standard that gets overlooked, but it is so crucial to this whole system, because this is the standard that ensures that the fish that is caught and landed under the MSC requirements is then the same fish that is served up on somebody's plate. Now, unfortunately, fish fraud is a huge, huge threat in the world right now. And it is this little bubble there, our chain of custody standard, that is fighting against this. Under this standard, every entity that handles the fish must be certified under the chain of custody in order to then sell the fish on, still carrying the MSC logo. If this chain is broken at any point by a non-certificate holder, the fish can no longer be sold on with the eco label because we can't ensure that no substitutions have taken place. So it is something that often happens in the background that people aren't necessarily aware of, but it is so vital to actually building the trust and reliability that this eco label represents. And then we move down into our consumers, into the little basket on the bottom. Now, this is often, again, one that I think gets overlooked by the individual, because this is representing the people who are preferentially purchasing seafood with the blue MSC label. And this is where people on the ground in the supermarket are stood there making that decision and making that choice. And as individuals, I know we can often sometimes feel, is our choice really going to matter? It really is. I cannot stress this enough. We might just be in billions out there, but every time we are shopping and we're making decisions, we're sending messages back to those supermarkets of exactly what we're wanting to buy. And it is that build-up of the individual purchases that we're seeing here that then leads us on to the second to last circle here. And this is representing our market demand. So as we're seeing more and more people choosing and buying the eco label, it actually builds up and starts to build up this pressure with creating a market demand for MSC certified seafood. And under this pressure, we've tumbled into our final circle, and this is representing the fisheries that are out there on the water that haven't yet joined the programme. And because of this build-up of demand, they are then starting to be incentivized into wanting to change their practices to then be able to voluntarily get assessed and join the programme. And then we complete our loop. And it has been very successful so far. We started over 20 years ago, a very, very small organisation with a little bit of chicken and the egg situation to begin with, of which we get first. But once we broke through and we could set this loop going, we have seen continual growth year on year with more fisheries joining the programme, more certified catch, more products on the shelves. So this change process is really having a great impact. And this is something as well of why I personally really like working for the. They're not a standalone institution. We are working collaboratively with the fishing industry, with the seafood business sector, with governments, with the scientific community, environmental groups, and so many others to actually then give the retailers and the restaurants and consumers an opportunity to choose and reward the sustainable fishing through their very purchasing of the seafood. And I find as well that the MSC is kind of sat at a bit of a crossroads. We almost provide a platform for all these different organisations to come together, speak together, work together with a common goal of trying to look after and protect our oceans. So for me, on a personal level, I find it a wonderful organisation to work for. And yeah, I'm really proud of a lot of the work that the MSC has done. Let's move on to, if it'll let me, to the actual work that I get to do. There we go. We got there. So on to what I get to research and look into. So I'm part of the research team at the MSC, and the overall aim for us is we're there to research and test essentially the impact that the MSC is having out on the water and across that whole theory of change. Now, this was a paper that we got published in the year with a great group of scientists from the MSC. I am also going to do a bit of a personal brag here because this was the first paper that I got to be lead author on. And we also managed to get it published in Fish and Fisheries. So when we got that acceptance, it was a huge honor for us. We were very, very proud of that. Now it is open access, so do feel free to download and have a read. I would encourage that because I do not have enough time to actually cover everything that is in this paper. It was a bit of a monster of a paper, to be honest. We thought about putting it into 3 different papers, but no, keep it all together. And also as well, all of the data used in this is online, so feel free to go to the paper and get the links to have a look at the data yourself. So, like I said, we can't cover everything, but I have just pulled out a couple of key research questions that I would like us to talk about today. So the first being, how did fishery performance change between pre-assessment and MSC certification assessment stages? And then secondly, what factors actually influence the likelihood of fisheries becoming certified? And in order to answer these questions, we decided to focus on one main data source of the pre-assessment reports. Now, I know I've immediately just jumped into doing all the MSC jargon. Don't worry, we will start off with explaining what on earth is a pre-assessment. So these are assessments that are completed prior to MSC certification and prior to MSC assessment. And they're essentially a gap analysis. So they're purely to inform the fishery of how they would score against the MSC standard if they had entered the full MSC assessment. So it's a really interesting, almost before shot of how the fishery is. I sometimes almost think of them as being a little bit like mock exams. They don't actually count for anything, they're not valid, but they do give you an indication of how the fishery would fare assessment. And this does make them really, really valuable from a scientific perspective. But they do come with a little bit of a word of caution because they are not detailed as an assessment. So we do have to bear that in mind. Now, they are often conducted by the same conformity assessment bodies that do the full assessments, but they don't have to be. There is no regulation around pre-assessments. So they could be done by a fishery who hired a private consultant to conduct the assessment, or it literally could be somebody who was working at the fishery, did the standard, had a go themselves. Really talking about a broad range detail. Now we have started to provide a pre-assessment template to try and help standardize this process a little more. But even with this, the information included still can be really variable. And it's also important to stress that this is not a mandatory step for certification. This is completely voluntary and completely for the fishery to do for themselves, which does mean we don't have a pre-assessment for every certified fishery, so we can't do a full comparison, unfortunately. Despite all this, we did plough on ahead, and through this project, we spent, oh gosh, a small diagram to represent almost 2 years' work here. But we brought together over 259 reports for the project, and these were scoured from MSC archives and also across the internet as well. Did a lot of Googling for these. And I was really quite proud of how diverse we managed to bring the reports in, because we saw reports coming in from over 100 different countries, 60 different gear types were represented, and over 300 different species were actually assessed in these reports. So this gave us a really broad, good overview of the global fisheries in its own way. So let's take a look at some results. So here we have a nice Sankey chart, and this is where we can look at relationship between between the outcome of the pre-assessment and the certification success. So on the left-hand side here, we have essentially the pre-assessment results. So in that first category, pass. What this is saying is when the pre-assessment was done, the conclusion of the pre-assessment was if this fishery had gone through with an MSC assessment, it probably would have passed. And probably is the very important word here, because this is not a guarantee. It was, again, just an indication. Then coming further down, we have our group risk of failing principle. If you remember me explain, you can pass all your performance indicators, but if you don't pass well enough to get that overall score of 80 for your principle, you're still going to fail. That is the group that we're seeing there. The next group, we have the risk of failing PIs. So these were fisheries that in pre-assessment, it was identified that failing a performance indicator. And for this group, to go into this group, they had to be failing at least one performance indicator. Some they were just failing one. Others I did see that every single PI as well. Broad range of fail falls into that group. On the right hand side, we have almost outcomes for these. So the top group being the ones that got certified. So these fisheries that did their pre-assessment and then came through, ran an MSC assessment, and gained their certification. Then below we have our no final certification. It does have a little asterisk there because this is a big group. The fisheries that went in here could be fisheries that went into assessment and failed their MSC assessment. It could be fisheries that entered their assessment and then decided to withdraw, that they weren't happy with completing and they decided to cut their losses. And then we also have the fisheries that did a pre-assessment and then didn't come forward for assessment. They kind of just stopped there. So they're all grouped together to bear in mind. Now, a first look at, we can see with that pass group that roughly only half of the fisheries that actually received favourable results in the pre-assessment actually go forward into MSC to pass the MSC assessment. And there could be a whole range of reasons for this. One of which as well, just to remember, is just because a fishery does a pre-assessment doesn't mean they're actually aiming for MSC certification. Some use it on a more almost personal note. They're fisheries that just want to check how they are doing sustainably and want to ensure they're doing well for their own sake. Or it might have been that their local fishery manager actually required them to conduct a pre-assessment. We have seen cases of that as well, because the MSC standard is now being used around the world by various management organisations. So a couple of different reasons there. But the most important lines I actually like to talk about here are these two, because these are the fisheries who, according to their pre-assessments, should have failed at certification, but they didn't. They came forward, they did their pre-assessment, they would have failed, but now they've come into MSC assessment and they've passed, they've gained certification, which means something must have changed. Again, could be a range of things. It could have been direct action by the fishery. Maybe they changed their net mesh, something like that. Or maybe it's on a much broader level, maybe something in the fishery management system in their area, altered the rules and the fishery had to comply with that, and that then actually brought them up on the standard. We really don't know. Unfortunately, this project was not designed to actually identify the specific changes, but this is clear evidence that something changed, something influenced the fishery and then made it sustainable against the MSC standard. And also as well, some more evidence we can look at the average time. So this is the rough time span between a fishery conducting the pre-assessment and a fishery entering and receiving its certification. So you can see the ones that were favourable to begin with, were actually coming through 1 to 2 years quicker than the fisheries that were originally failing. This is just indicating that something else was happening in the meantime. Probably some sort of work was being undertaken to actually then enable those fisheries to come forward and be certified. Now, like I said, we can't say exactly what has changed, but we can actually have a little sneak peek into the area of where these changes were occurring. There we go. So here we have our second graph. Now, along the x-axis here, we have essentially the pre-assessment score. And then along the y-axis, we have the corresponding certification score. So this is only looking now at the fisheries that did both a pre-assessment and MSC assessment. It does also include that group of fisheries that failed their MSC assessments as well, so they're all brought in. Now, under our standard, like I said, we have 25, or at least on this version, there was 28 performance indicators, and they are grouped into our 3 principles, but also we can separate them into groups below that as well. So the blue points here are our principle 1, orange is principle 2, green principle 3. Now, if there had been absolutely no change, those points would be sat on that dotted line running down the middle, because it would have been equal between pre-assessment and certification. So the further away from the line, the greater the score change that has occurred. And what was really interesting for us was when we could see actually how much the P2 scores had changed, because this was the first time we were really able to graph these changes and see them in this way. And you can see there that bycatch, the performance indicators relating to the bycatch species, had the greatest score change, so potentially the greatest improvements as well. So a lot to dig into there. Although, let's move on to our second research question. There we go. So this was where I wanted to look into the factors that are actually influencing certification. Now, in order to do this, we actually identified 19 different variables that we thought would have potential influence over whether or not a fishery would be successful in its certification. We use random forest analysis to help determine which of these influencing variables would have greater influence and at what level. I unfortunately don't have time to explain how the forest analysis works, but it's really fascinating. Do go and read up on it. We do have time for, I will quickly show you actually how to read some of the graphs that get produced. So here we have just our ordinary set of axes. Along the y-axis, what you will be seeing is the probability of MSC certificate success. Then along the x-axis, we're going to see the influencing variable that the computer has identified as being the most influential. And then we'll have another set of axes showing actually the diversity of data, and that will be shown in the blue background. And then we're going to also have the full data set shown. So this will be shown with the blue line. Now, essentially, with these plots, if the line comes out as completely flat, what that means is that variable actually isn't having any kind of impact on the Y variable. So what we're looking for is actually bends in the line and changes, and that'll be where the results are actually lying. Also, as well, we decided to run the analysis 3 different times. So we ran it on the full data set to look at the global fisheries, but then we also wanted to consider those fisheries that might be placed at a more disadvantage than the wider world. So these we identified into 2 subgroups. One subgroup of fisheries based in countries that are identified by the World Bank as being low to middle income. And then we also have a subset targeting fish that have a relatively low landed value in their country as well. And they'll be represented by orange and green. Okay, let's take a look at results. influencing variable is our fishery management index, which essentially is a 0 to 1 rating of effectiveness of fishery management system and actually meeting its objectives, which was developed and published by another institute with Mike a few years ago as well. Now, if we just focus for a moment on the blue line, we can see that there is this positive correlation between an increase in FMI value and then an increase in probability of MSC certification. And just to kind of put this in perspective for you all, I have just quickly labelled where a few countries sit. So we can see this is where Spain, the UK and Canada would sit as well. So well done, guys, because you're actually scoring above 0.8, which is a really, really good score for fishery management. Well done. And then another interesting point with this graph, obviously, is to look at what that orange line is doing. So the orange line, again, is representing those fisheries that are based in countries that have low to middle income categorized to them. And what we see here is when the FMI is low, less than 0.6, we do see that the quality of MSC certification is lower than that of the global data set. However, as FMI rises and becomes more than around 0.6, this greater management capacity appears to be compensating for the disadvantages caused by being from these lower income countries, because you can see there that it is then following the same pattern as the rest of the world as well. Now, another key variable that we were very excited to see was this one, where we have the MSC % of global catch of species being shown there. So this is looking at each species in particular, not of the whole of the world's catch in one. So just focusing on each specific species. And then essentially what we're seeing here is as this percentage of capture species being assessed increases, so does the probability of MSC certification success. Now, we can see here that we have this very, very sudden line kind of jump up around the 0.15 point. And sorry, just one moment. We do have a low battery warning. Is that okay? I don't want to disappear on everyone. That's okay. I'll carry on. So yes, this point here. Oh, I think good. Yeah. Line increase here. How excited we were at the MSC. Because for a number of years, many of our MSC outreach staff have anecdotally noted and been aware when the global catch of a species becomes MSC certified around the 20% mark, we do see an increase in the uptake of similar fisheries to the programme. So this little line up here is actually really pivotally important because it is, again, more evidence supporting that theory of change that we talked about at the start. And it's this positive feedback mechanism, how we see more certified catch of a given species, having more demand on the market, which then adds pressure to other fisheries to change their ways, become more sustainable and join the programme. Some really interesting results there. I can only cover 2 graphs. There's about 18 graphs in the paper to go rush ahead and see some of them. But I just want to start to draw this to a close and look at outcomes, just some takeaways from what we've talked about today. Over 80% of fisheries actually fail their pre-assessment. A startling number, but the positives of this is that some can change. Some fisheries can change their habits and practices, and they can actually then come on to be MSC certified. Now, overall, we got improved prior to certification. So it's not just once the fisheries join the program, they begin improving. All of that work is happening way before they even come and really talk to the MSC. Improvement across all areas of the standard, but we've still got changes occurring. And that's where we're looking at the bycatch, we're looking at habitats, we're looking at the endangered, threatened and protected species. So this really is the wider area. And then, so we have the good fishery management scores, and then the percentage of catch already MSC certified are actually some of the best predictors towards certification success. And also really important to note that it is good fishery management can actually start to assist in overcoming the additional that are faced by many countries that are coming from low to middle income backgrounds. And just before we really do end, I'm just going to do a quick plug actually for our Ocean Stewardship Fund. This is a really great initiative. I think it's something like 5% of our royalties are now going into this fund. And the fund's overall aim, as it says there, is to accelerate the progress to sustainability by funding innovative research. And there's loads of different programs within the fund, but I thought some of you guys might be particularly interested because we do have grants for student projects up to £10,000, which, quick conversion, I think is about 16 to 17 Canadian dollars, something like that. And a big reason I bring it up is because applications are open and the deadline's not till December. So plenty of time. If you are interested, please do go ahead to our website. There's a really good portal that'll just walk you through everything. And finally, as well, I just want to say, you know, if anybody here or online is doing any sort of work and research in fisheries around the globe or MSC fisheries in particular, do feel free to get in touch and ask for any information that you want, either how the standard works, because I do understand it can be quite complex, but also as well, we have our Tracker Fishery website where you can look up all of the fishery assessments. They are all public documents. If you're wanting to do a really big project, I mean, you're going to be facing a lot of data scraping, please talk again. We have a lot of the information already stored, and we might be able to, we're not, you can just drop me an email or the research team an email and get back to you. But yes, thank you so much for listening, guys. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Okay, no, that, well, if we'll do questions in the room and online, and
Yeah.
if they're in the room, if you could just briefly summarize them for the people listening
Yes,
on.
microphone's up there.
Yeah.
Got it.
Questions on the observation that young and around since you had them on the plot, do you have any concern around the data densities that underlie that data jump, because you're obviously scaling off, there are not that many, because I guess that benefit from that high level of communication. Question one. Question two, do you think the jump?
Yeah, we'll do that one, then we'll come straight back. So yes, what's the questions around is looking at the data density of the percentage of MSC catch, because obviously it was a very high peak, which then tailed off, and we're looking at that sudden jump on the blue line, which is then happening over a smaller sample size. And yes, that is something we need to be cautious about. But I will sort of note that we had the pre-assessments from over 300 different species. One of the reasons we have so many species in there is because these pre-assessments were covering some, what you'd call very I remember reading one that was actually on coral harvesting, which our standard was never considered for. So you have got, I think, a very inflated area in the lower range where we only have 1, 2 or none whatsoever fisheries of that. So I think that is what causes quite a large jump in the start. But like you say as well, even bearing that in mind, we are still looking at a small group. But I think because we have of the anecdotal evidence at the end, this is a pattern and trend we have been seeing for a while. So I think neither would be they do help to make sure to have on there because we do have to consider it. But in this, we can bear it in mind, but I think we have enough support as well. And then you had another question?
Okay, so I want on that, you think that jump is mostly a reflection of the sort of market pressure that as more and more of that particular species becomes certified, there's increasing pressure? Or do you think it's more because someone has figured out how to do the fishing sustainably and it's easy for, you know, subsequent fisheries to just adopt the techniques, the same methods, the same governance regime?
Yeah, both I think are very valid. Oh, sorry, I need to summarize. So we're talking about, is the jump caused by actual market pressure of fisheries feeling the pressure to join other fisheries that are already in the programme? Or is it more about once the fisheries have actually gone through the process of assessment, is it then easier because they figured out how to become sustainable so others can follow the pathway? And yeah, I think both are very, very valid points, and it's something in the paper we do actually discuss because a lot of it can be with market pressure. So we saw that happening in the North Sea with some of the cod fisheries. Many were holding out for a long time, and then once one jumped in, the rest just had to quickly follow because they realized they would be locked out of markets. But then we also do see the other side where the MSC assessment requires a lot of data and a lot of information, and quite a few fisheries many years ago were struggling purely because they didn't have the data to be assessed, even though they probably were very good. They just didn't really have the evidence to back it up. So there was a lot of investment that has had to go into actually conducting research and surveys into actually finding out about fish stocks that maybe we didn't normally know about. And once that information is available, maybe like you say, by one fishery going forward, pulling that information out, that because it's then public access information on the MSC assessment, then other fisheries are able to use that data to help with their assessment as well. So I think, you know, both are valid points of how these fisheries may be being pulled in.
I'm going to use my prerogative and ask a question, which I'm not trying to put you on the spot. So you can make a culpa and say you don't want to answer. There's a number, as you know, there's a number of certification programs. Some less stringent than others, but they have a little stamp or something on either a restaurant menu or a product. Do you think that's encouraging people down the path of making sustainable choices and putting pressure? Let's say the MSC is like, that's ultimately where you want to get them. That's sort of stepping stones towards that path, or is that viewed as a shortcut that in some ways may be undercutting that high bar?
I mean, it's more into my personal opinion. Shall I just quick?
I don't know if that could probably pick up online. I have a loud voice.
Yeah, I'll just say anyway. So we're talking about the other eco labels out there that aren't as rigorous as the MSC standard. Is it encouraging people to make better choices? And do we almost on to move towards the MSC? Say that about right?
Yeah. Or is it undercutting?
Or is it undercutting? This I think is a very mixed one. Personally, for me, I think that it's actually causing a lot of noise and confusion for consumers. We are now being bombarded with so much information that is starting to contradict one another. I know actually with friends and family for myself, they often question me of like, but it had this label, so doesn't that make it okay? So for me, my overall message to them is always the MSC is the most robust, most scientifically backed program. Whether or not it's undercutting, I wouldn't say that there's any great fear amongst fisheries with the MSC program, because it is such a solid and well-known program. But obviously, you know, we have to still be looking to the future. And we seem to also be moving in a better direction as a world. I don't know where you guys are, but certainly in the EU, we've recently actually put a ban on sort of greenwashing eco labels. So unless they are able to actually back the claims that they're making, those logos won't be shown anymore. So it is a bit of a mixed world out there, and it's hard to answer. But I think, yeah, we've got to kind of push forward for the correct message from everyone, that may make the choice clearer for the public, so there's not as much losing faith in sustainability as well, which I think would be bad for all types of eco labels, whether it be fisheries or not.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, sir, go ahead. Go ahead, Amanda.
I'm wondering if you're seeing any trends in which sorts of fisheries are coming to you for in the pre-assessment or the certification. Like, what are you surprised by? You mentioned a couple of coral fisheries and things, but in terms of gears or locations in the world, geographies or anything else, what has been the transitions in what sorts of fisheries are trying for certification?
Oh, that's a really interesting one. Summarize. Sorry. I always forget that. So Anna's asking, have we seen any trends of fisheries that are entering MSC assessment, trends in which ones are coming pre-assessment, which fisheries are starting to reach out to us? I'm a little bit moved. I only tend to get to look into the fisheries almost 5 years later, because obviously with research, give time into that. So I'm just trying to think if there's anything startling. I mean, in mind, I like people's work at the MSC, our IT program, which is looking at trying to support fisheries to actually come. So they're starting to do fishery improvement program, and almost with the MSC, they're able to be monitored to check they are moving down the path, which is really exciting to see. I think that has a lot of promise. But yeah, unfortunately, I can't say I've really noticed anything coming through, but that could just be because I don't get to see the fisheries immediately and get to interact with them. Unfortunately, there's an amazing team that gets to do that. I'm a bit jealous of them.